Hello, and welcome to the Voices of Bellevue School District podcast, where we amplify the voices of students, staff, and families, sharing their unique lived experiences to strengthen our Bellevue community. In each episode, we'll explore We Belong, significant cultural traditions, customs, and lived experiences of our beloved Bellevue community. We learn academic programs and innovative initiatives, along with the staff and students behind them. We lead discussions with leaders in our community on topics that drive innovation in education. I'm Janine Thorne, Chief of Communications, and I'm joined today by Dr. William Jackson, who is the Director of Teaching and Learning, but also the Principal of the Year.
Thank you.
So glad we got a chance to talk this morning. We were talking about music and like favorite songs, and just tell us a little bit about the song we were playing, Tomorrow by Quincy Jones. For those that don't know, Quincy Jones was an American musician, and he just recently passed away. But he was a student here at Garfield,
Yep.
right?
Garfield High School. Graduated, I believe, in the 50s or 60s. One of my fondest memories when Quincy Jones had passed, there was somebody sent out something on one of the platforms that said, if you were Black and you grew up in the church, this song was, and you grew up in the 90s and 80s, this was a song that you had to sing and perform. And I was like, oh my goodness, it just brought back a core memory, like the movie Inside Out, where the core memories are drawn out. And that core memory was drawn from me having a gray sweater vest running behind my sister, singing Tomorrow in the choir. And I remember we did about 6 or 7 shows with the choir before we were pulled out. But yeah, we were in the choir for about 2 months.
Yeah. One of my favorite Quincy Jones songs is the theme song to Sanford and Son. Yeah. The Fred G. Sanford. And the G stood for garbage. Well, again, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
One of the first questions I wanted to ask you is, can you share a bit about your journey into education? What inspired you to choose this path, and what experiences have shaped your approach as an educational leader?
Sure. I appreciate you asking. My parents, my mom and dad, were my first true educators. We did grow up in a split household, but my mom, she worked in the community. I grew up right on 21st and Denny, right in Seattle, Washington, right in the heart of the Central District. And my mom worked at Miller Community Center. She had also performed before I was born at Yesler and the performing arts. And she was, she was well read and always speaking life into us. But she worked in teen centers, and she worked at, even the homeless shelters. And so she would take us to, I forgot the name of them, teen parent homes. She would take us there, and we would spend the night there sometimes because she was caring for these mothers. And we were learning a lot, my sister and I, Jasmine, about service and care for others, and just making sure that you give your last piece to ensure that the next person has resources. We lived in public housing, and if you have your last stick of butter, your little piece of sugar, whatever you can give to your neighbor, and that was my mom. My dad was the complete opposite in that he worked 3-4 jobs, and he was, he Metro bus driver, still drives Metro, also worked as a Safeway clerk, also worked at the gas station. He was instilling in us hard work. And so the neighborhood we lived in wasn't necessarily the safest neighborhood, but it was rich with culture. And so he would always walk us in the neighborhood and teach us about the history of the neighborhood and the history of our identity and the beauty and the opportunities, but instilling in us that there's a life beyond that, and making sure that we always worked hard, even to the point of walking us to school and teaching us values even when we didn't want to. He would have a car that he could drive us, but he would say, no, we're walking so we can learn. And so that those two educators were my first teachers growing up. And so that taught this sense of service in me and care and joy. My mom was a very joyous person, and my dad also hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That reminds me a lot of what Dr. Aramaki's mission is in terms of the beloved community here
Absolutely.
in Bellevue. And we are just so glad to have you here as a leader, because what you just talked about, the sense of community, the sense of values that, in the community, you had strong leaders like your parents that may not have been, formally educated or trained, but then here you as the next generation have brought that to the table. Tell us a little bit about, before we get to Principal of the Year, tell us a little bit about your role in the district, what brought you here, and what you're working on.
Sure. My role currently as Director of Teaching and Learning, it's very vast, and I have a great team that supports me. Dr. Melissa Macias and Scott Powers has, and the whole teaching and learning team of ITCLs and developers, just expansive and just great educators and caring leaders. Yeah, a lot of work is going in, but two of the areas that I'm most passionate about and that I'm able to lead in is one is reimagining middle schools, and the other is consistent grading. And they work together in ways, but I would argue that Reimagine Middle Schools is where my heart is most right now. I mean, outside of curriculum adoptions and other areas around leadership development, but those two have most of my attention and care and time. The two focus areas, and these are annual plan goals. Reimagine Middle Schools is an annual plan goal put together by educators that were a part of the Reimagine Middle School core team last year. Two of the priority areas that they brought forward to the school board was to have problem-based learning in middle schools and to have advisory-based middle schools. And this was based off of climate data and equity interviews with students and families, expressing that the sense of belonging, care, and love and joy for learning was not necessarily there in middle schools. And it was feeling like pre-high school or advanced or preparatory school for high school and less middle school. And I was given the opportunity to take lead in that effort of taking it beyond the recommendations and into implementation. And from what I've learned as a leader, as a principal, having an advisory, having a mentorship, and having project-based learning, I was able to step in and help get some momentum around it and with great teams. And so we're excited about that.
You emphasize the importance of collaboration across roles within the district in a previous conversation that we had. How do you envision working with principals and assistant principals and teachers to foster a unified approach to student success in Bellevue?
This comes back to centering student voice. And that's a justice-centered approach to leadership. And if that's my ultimate goal, then I have to take a justice-centered approach in how I lead. And that's flattening hierarchies. And through the hierarchy of our leadership as Director of Teaching and Learning, through a organizational chart that could have people that have direct reports to me, and that can have impacts on folks' stance and how they work with direct reports and all those pieces that are necessary for organizational change. However, as a leader, I have to understand the organization and see how I can situate transformation through that. And one way is to flatten those hierarchies and develop a process of participatory design. And that is through engagement of, at highest, students and families, but through our system, absolutely our principals, our instructional technologists, our developers, our assistant principals, teachers as well, as many as possible to ensure that not only is there buy-in, but engagement and capacity. So educators feel a part of change and transformation, that they've had their hand in the change.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine with this being your first year in the district, you being able to see those systems that need to be addressed so that we can bring in more problem-based learning and more advisory, more continuity for middle grade students, but even all of our students overall. And so that work that you're doing just is even more important for the larger system. You're now the director of teaching and learning, but before coming, you were the principal at Nathan Hale, and you were principal and are principal of the year. As a Black leader in education, what does it mean to you to have your work recognized? And how do you hope it inspires future generations of Black and Brown educators and students?
Thank you. I don't take it lightly at all. And I do mention my family a lot, and I was raised to each door that opens up, you will hold that door open, not just for one person, but as long as you can. And if you break a finger holding it open for somebody, that's just a finger. That's fine. You'll be okay. But my goal is to ensure that everyone has an equitable opportunity, not just for educational access and success. This has been a gift and also an opportunity to showcase other leaders. I do know that given the privilege to be principal of the year, I have a lot of opportunities to speak in spaces and to bring leaders to spaces. And oftentimes leaders do get caught in a trope that they are pushed into being the only one. And I wanted to break that, and we can constantly break that through different ways. But I wanted to truly break that by as many chances as I get. I bring in other leaders. One thing that we've had over the past month, it was National Principals Month. So I had a chance to partner with our Association of Washington School Principals and have host equity sessions that were focused on justice-centered leadership throughout Washington State. And originally, there were 6 sessions that I would be holding and leading. That didn't feel equitable to me, especially if I want equitable access for leaders. So I thought it was opportune to bring in various leaders from throughout the state of Washington that could share their practice. Another challenge that we have is our pipeline. We mentioned our teacher pipeline, but also our school leader pipeline and district leader pipeline. And I have a responsibility in that, in ensuring that educators receive proper mentorship. And I'm a mentor to several principals, assistant principals, and educators that are seeking opportunities to grow. And that's not just check-ins and mentorship, but also specific practices around evaluation frameworks and how to have interview skills and how to practice leadership and how to center student voice. And all of those areas are really important to build capacity in not just our system, but throughout education. And so I just use this as an opportunity and a gift to just create space for other leaders. That's my role and that's my responsibility. It's not to be at the center of it. I like that because that ties back to the community example that you gave earlier of just calling people in and not calling people out. So even identifying yourself as a Black leader or a leader of color is not just for, Black students. It's everyone, right? It's not just for leaders of color or teaching and learning leaders of color or administrators of color. It's for all of us because the idea of community means that we all come along together. And we bring each other up. Yes. I would happen to be on I had the pleasure, myself and Janisha Branch, to join you through the Association of Washington School Principals, AWSP. And we had a session on recruiting and retaining leaders of color. And it was a great conversation. Tell me a little bit about your work with AWSP and tell us a little bit about how that experience with AWSP has been and something joyous about it. Sure. Yes, you led a session with Janisha Branch, and thank you for being part of the equity sessions.
It was fun.
That was an amazing one. Recruiting and retaining educators of color is essential to our system. As I mentioned, On one side, on not one side, but on one end of it, the importance of building culture in communities so students can see educators of color. But on another end of it, it's good for business. It's good for our diverse economy. It's good for innovation. Our students are stepping into worlds that are extremely diverse, and we want them to be in collaborative networks that prepare them for different workspaces and different work groups. I can come back to problem-based learning and that association to their work that they'll be doing as they get older in a moment. But AWSP has been just a great partner and a great friend. And I want to continue that partnership because at Bellevue School District, our goal is, one of our strategic plan goals is recruiting and retaining educators. And part of that is nested under educators of color. And so I want to ensure that my partnership with them and our partnership with them is strong so that we can have the highest quality leaders that want to come to Bellevue School District and lead here. Through those sessions, there's already leaders that are knocking on the door and want to join and be a part of the work that we're doing through that one session that you led. And so that says something about Bellevue School District and what we're up to. So I just think having that extension is good for us and good for AWSP as well, because they're able to highlight a school district and leaders in a school district that are doing innovative work that's tied to their goals, and we're able to share our work that's in their work that's tied to our goals as well.
Hey, BSD families, we'll be right back after this short break.
Join us for an exciting episode featuring Tillicum Middle School's problem-based learning experience. Our 8th graders dive into the environmental impacts of Bellevue's new light rail. Did it disturb the wetlands? Where are the beavers? Students will explore the balance between technology and nature, debate engineering versus environmental protection, and even design transit-oriented developments with 3D printers. From science to social studies, watch as they tackle real-world issues and engage with experts. Plus, our media tech students are creating fun stickers to spread the word. Stay tuned for a journey into the heart of student-driven learning.
There's so much innovation taking place in Bellevue amidst all of the other challenges that school districts are facing. We're still innovating, and we have top-notch leadership. So like yourself, we just spoke recently, Dr. Aramaki and I, to the secondary art teacher of the year, Jen Bitter. And it was great to have her, and and she just lit up as she started talking about her students. So I'm going to ask you to just tell us a little bit about, a student that may have impacted you in the way you teach, challenged you in a way that just, made you even go harder in education for our students.
Sure. There's so many. When I was a teacher, I had students that challenged me and pushed me. But I would say, and even as an administrator, oh man, Sure. Yeah, I'll just go to it. So my justice-centered lens and my advancement of racial equity and justice was definitely put to the test with a student named Hamed. Can't give his last name, but he graduated from Nathan Hale last year. And one of the biggest challenges that I had and that he had was that he was our biggest leader in our school. However, he didn't love school. He loved engagement in everything but the classroom. And so
I can relate to that, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And, I developed a great partnership and relationship with him where if I knew or learned of any incidences that were coming down, I usually talk to Hamed and say, Hamed, I need you to put this to rest. And he would be like, I got you. And then, 20 minutes later, this issue is not even an issue anymore. And, but we faced an incident where he actually had to be removed and for quite some time because he lives in two different worlds, or he did. He was involved in, gang activity as well. And some of that had bled into the school. And so as a result, we had to remove him. But as an educational leader and as a justice center leader, we're constantly trying to figure out how to make it work and how to figure out a route to ensure that he's successful. And, bending and figuring out the system and maneuvering it, because the easy route is just to keep him removed and keep the situation out of our hands. But the challenge is how do we actually bring him back? And so that was working with a lot of our educators, working with students, doing restorative circles, and working with his family so he could graduate. And he actually, works and goes to school in the Lake City community. And those are incidences that bring me joy. I had a mentorship of all Black students, and there was so much joy and excitement that we would have parties for students when they reached success. Even when a student was removed from school and brought back, we would have parties. We would, celebrate students. We mourned the death of a few students that were killed in gang violence. Mm-hmm. And we would have different types of celebrations when students would join in leadership roles. And because we knew that one door opens up, others would join in as well. And we transformed our school community as a result. And so those were different highlights that brought me a lot of joy as an educator.
For sure. You mentioned earlier about just how, equity and equity-driven education or decision-making really was a way that elevated everyone. Mm-hmm. Can you just dive in a little bit deeper into why, for someone who's thinking, here in Bellevue, we have such a small population of Black students. Why have this podcast? Why even be talking about this? Why is it even relevant to me? And, as a parent who has a student that may not be of color.
Sure. So there's, a few different approaches, and one could be through a school and systems approach. And that's for all of us who are in education. My wife reminds me that we live in a bubble as educators. She's a property manager. So the work of education doesn't always vibrate outside of our space. But one thing that does is the future and the present. So within the present and the future are work environments that are extremely diverse. And it is of most interest for parents to encourage their kids to be in environments that are diverse, because they're going to be in work environments working on work projects that are based on their employment and their access to increases and their access to actual income to feed their families in diverse environments. Mm-hmm. And if they do not learn how to be in diverse environments, work through, challenge, learn about different cultures, learn about how to communicate, build relationships, achieve goals together, it can potentially impact their access to future jobs. And that's the bottom line. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to make it doom and gloom, but if there's any convergence of interest for that, mm-hmm. I hope that would be something of importance. Now, as an educator, I think that it's important for everyone to spend time with each other, build community, build culture, because it's a loving environment that you want to help students grow in their frontal lobe and develop this care and love and joy for learning. Mm-hmm. But some folks aren't interested in that. Mm-hmm. Some are like, what does this matter for my child? How this matters for your child is it can impact their employment, and it can impact their relationships with people, and it can impact their opportunities to go to college. Because the university is going to ask, when you fill out your application or when you write your essay for college, what are your experiences? And if your experiences do not have a diverse palette, that can impact your opportunity to actually go to that university. Mm.
It's like going miles wide as opposed to miles deep, just yes. being a deeper individual yes. and being able to relate. We've got over 100 or so odd languages spoken in this district. We've got people from all over the world that are here, right here in Bellevue and in our school district. And, the coming together around beloved communities is important. And like you say, it will make our students even better people. That's the whole part of being what we've been saying, a force multiplier, or being a person that is people, for planet, for our future world. So that's the brand message. I always stay on brand.
I agree.
But we want to live those words and not just say them.
Absolutely.
Right? Yes.
And I mean, imagine this space that we're in currently right now. If I had never had an experience around people that look like us, I wouldn't know or had developed comfort to be able to speak truthfully in a space like this, which could impact my opportunities to even have this job that I have.
Yes, absolutely. What advice would you give to other educators and leaders about fostering an educational environment that values diverse identities? What would you say to them to prepare them so that they can help students that go on in a global and inclusive community and thrive in a global and inclusive community?
Sure. I always believe that our students are truth tellers. It's hard for them to not be based off of their experiences in life. They haven't experienced enough life to develop strategies to not tell the truth. So they're going to let us know. And it's important that we create the conditions in our classrooms and in our school communities where one strategy is actually centering their voice. And when I say center their voice, meaning what they express to us is not just a moment to hear them, but it's also a moment to shift our professional learning practices and shift our hiring practices, our arrangements of our staff, our master schedule practices, and how we plan and set schedules for educators based off of our student needs. And that's how you shift culture and climate. Those are technical strategies based off the adaptive that students share with us. So I would say, listen to your students and care to build a culture around what they share with you.
Reflecting on your early days as an educator, what challenges did you face and how do those experiences drive you to advocate for curriculum changes and more inclusive practices as you progress in your career?
Access. One of the barriers that I faced early on as an educator was access. So I was a social studies teacher, and I was always trying to figure out strategies to engage students. And one of my strategies was always comparing or using modern day resources to the history and using historical context of now to then, because history does repeat itself in various ways. For example, when Johann Gutenberg created the printing press, it was revolutionary at the time when it was created, and it transformed how information was spread. And I connected that to the shift of when I taught, it was during a shift in hip hop. And so the shift of the CD to the digital form of music being shared. And I shared that music is going to shift as a result because you're going to get what we call microwave music because it's so accessible. The artist can't keep up to the demand. Just like when Johann Gutenberg created the printing press, the need for written material couldn't keep up with the demand of the writers because there wasn't enough writers at the time because there wasn't enough access for folks to be able to write. And so just for everyone listening, if I didn't share about the modern day music, I don't know how interested you would be in Johann Gutenberg and the printing press. I mean, not too many students are interested in that, but we test students and we ensure that they're engaged in the learning based on that and say, go to class because you're learning about Johann Gutenberg. No. And so that is how early on that wasn't as of interest to leadership that I was around.
Yeah.
And sharing that to families, it kind of broke a mold, and that was hard to break through and to share strategies that, was very needed at the time. As a teacher, again, I focused on three just skills. I shared with families that I didn't mind about the content. I love content. However, the skills is what's necessary, and that's collaboration, communication, and I use the term hard work at the point, but that's just shifted because that varies based off of your context. However, that wasn't as supported at the time. And so as I grew as a leader, those didn't change. I just was able to find mentors that were able to support me. And I just kept to those core beliefs and my more core beliefs of equity, access, and justice. And I use those to fuel how I support leaders that are doing innovative things on the side that are justice centered, that aren't necessarily receiving spotlight literally to this month. You know, it doesn't change in who I am because I'm always trying to create access, because I know that feeling as an educator or a professional, and you're trying to break through. And typically it's educators of color, women, Black educators, Black people, people of color that are trying to break through. And it's hard because of, you know, modes that were outdated, racist structures and systems that don't support our growth and development.
Yeah. Absolutely. I have to concur with that 100%. Last question. As a student, what was your favorite subject and why?
Wow. My favorite subject as a student was science, because I loved the scientific method. It actually made sense to me. And so when I got to college, I learned the inquiry method and the research method through history. And it connected to me the way that science did. So my love for learning got reignited when I got to college.
Any particular science?
Yeah. Back when I was in school, it was 6th grade science. We were studying plants, and it was through the nucleus, and we were studying the...
Don't ask me.
I know, whatever... I forgot the names of but I loved lab science and
super. Yeah. I was in, so we had biology and the frog, and they brought the frog out, and I passed out.
Yep.
And that was it. So
yeah, that
science.
Smell was hard for me.
Oh, the formaldehyde.
Frog. Yeah, that was bad.
It was bad. It was bad.
Yeah.
But that's a part of some of that, I guess, problem-based learning,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for joining us. Hey, Bellevue families, stay tuned for the next episode in this series. It's on problem-based learning, and you'll hear from educators from Tillicum Middle School. They'll be exploring and asking the question, where are all the beavers? Thank you for listening.